there's actually two things. The first one is I get this question all the time. Recruiting agencies charge candidates. No, we do not. We do work on a two-sided customer service. So our candidates, we want to give them the best experience, but also the businesses who are actually paying us. But one of the biggest misconceptions and myths are that all we're doing is pulling resumes from a database and sending them over. So part of the reason why you're paying for those direct talent is one, we're either going out directly to meet and gather those very specific targets. But generally, recruiters and recruiting agencies, they have candidates that they've had ongoing, very long-term relationships.
Hey everyone, this is Devin Miller here with another episode of The Inventive Expert. I'm your host, Devin Miller, the serial entrepreneur that's grown several startups into 7 and 8 figure businesses, as well as the founder and CEO of Miller IP Law, where he helps startups and small businesses with their patents and trademarks. You ever need help with yours, just go to strategymeeting.com, grab some time with us to chat, and we're always here to help. Now, today we've got another great guest on the podcast, Nichloas Sharp. And Nichloas, we're going to be talking about a few things really surrounding kind of talent acquisition and, what are some of the hiring challenges with talent acquisition and how do you attract top startup, especially or top talent as a startup. Sometimes that can be difficult when you're on a limited budget, don't have all the resources, probably don't have all the manpower and a number of those things. And yet are still, as with all businesses, needing that top talent and also looking at how you can maybe or a lot of times find the right partnership if you're going to use recruiters as part of those efforts. So really should be a great conversation. Thing is one where will be helpful across a number of fronts as people are on their startup journeys. So with that much as a wind up and a pitch and introduction, welcome on to the podcast, Nichloas.
Thank you so much for having me, Devin. It's really great to be here. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. So now, just as a quick reminder to the audience, so Nichloas has been on our sister podcast, The Inventive Journey. So if you want to go catch his full episode, go ahead and or go over to The Inventive Journey and check him out there. Now, for those in the audience that haven't had a chance to catch that episode, maybe just take a minute or two and just give a little bit of a background or a quick introduction on yourself.
Absolutely. Yeah, so I live in the Bay Area. I'm currently a client partner at IntelliPro. We're a global recruiting and staffing company. I started off as an iOS engineer and have spent the past several years helping enterprises, but in particular SMBs, with their hiring. So it's been a really great experience, and I'm excited to share some of these experiences with you guys.
Well, I'm definitely excited to hear about them and looking forward to some great information. So kind of diving in, and I mentioned a few of the different items, and probably in no particular order, but one of the ones that we had chatted a bit on, which I think is a fair one and fair issue that a lot of it comes up often for a startup or a small business, and is one to where you have to be realistic. Is hey, startup or small business, you're not going to have the same level of resources, funds, bandwidth, personnel, whatever a number of limiting factors when you're trying to do a number of issues across the board. And that includes, hey, whether we're trying to do development, legal costs, accounting, recruiting, staff, having enough hours in the day, all of those things can play into it. And so you're going to say, hey, when we go to recruiting, we can't maybe offer, as high a salary as a huge, I'll pick on Google, not that there's any reason to pick on Google, but we can't or compete for tech talent with Google or Facebook or other things. And so, hey, how do we go and attract the top talent? Well, sometimes they offer equity and you may say, well, the equity is not worth anything yet, and you're kind of living on a promise, or there are other ways. So I'd love to get your kind of insight, kind of when you're looking as a startup small business, how do you get that top talent when a lot of times, it feels like you're at a disadvantage?
Yeah, I think that you touched on a couple of different things that I think are super important. The limited bandwidth of the people who are currently working there, budget constraints, and brand recognition when it comes down to it. So I think when you're really trying to end up hiring these top tech talent, there's a few things that you can do. I always think it's important to first start at your own employees and try to leverage their networks. A lot of smaller businesses have already hired, their friends, former colleagues, maybe even former bosses. So their network still may be a little limited, but usually coming from an internal referral, you know that they're going to suggest people who they want to work with and are qualified for the job. So I always think starting there is a great way to start with that. I also think that you should be
Sorry, one question just on that. I'll push back. Not that I don't agree with what you said, but I think the hesitation would be is certainly if you're going to go out and recommend a friend, colleague, somebody you've worked with before, have a good relationship, you're going to think highly of them. Now, the flip side is, on the management side is you may say, hey, they're trying to get their friend a job because they like the person, because they want to do them a favor, because they're friendly with them, because they know they're down on the luck. And so, you've mentioned on they'll do a good job, which absolutely could be true. But I think the flip side is sometimes you worry they will be a good person or they have a good relationship with the person referring them, but do I engage them? So, is there a way? Because I think that absolutely internal networks are better than going out and just throwing up an ad and or seeing who applies. But how do you balance that or safeguard against that? Any thoughts?
well, I think that that's going to be hiring the right people to begin with. I think that as an earlier stage startup, you want to make sure that you're hiring people that can one hit the job running, and two don't need to necessarily be managed that as much because you need to get the job done. So I think hiring the right people early enough that you can build that trust on. And then it's going to go down to the interview process. I think it's great to engage with them, but if you have a great interview process set up to begin with, then you're going to be able to weed out those people that may not actually be either a great cultural fit or maybe they're missing something from their current experience that will allow them to be super successful at the job.
No, I that definitely makes sense, and I love that as a thought. So let's say, okay, you take that step. We're going to hire the right people, bring it on when you're getting the business going, and then as you have the needs demands, you're going to look initially in your closer, more internal networks or with the employees or other connect or network that you have. So you identify those people that gets you part of the way. In other words, they're gonna, people you're referring, if you have a great CTO as an example, and he says, here's a great software engineer I'd love to bring on board, speaks highly of the person to bring on board, it'll give weight if you reach out to that person and say, hey, we want to bring you on board, and this person recommended you. Sometimes you're still that disadvantage of you can go and get the top talent. They're saying, hey, I'm making double what you're offering. And yes, my friend said this is an awesome place to work, but I don't know that I could take a half, once you identify those people and have part of that battle, any other thoughts as to how you go about tackling that issue?
Absolutely. So there's a few strategies that I would suggest with that. So when people are looking at your company, they are instantly going to go into LinkedIn. They may even go to Glassdoor. A lot of companies don't even set up Glassdoor early, and so they may not have any reviews. So it's unlikely for you to have a huge online presence. But I think utilizing those free or super low cost tools and platforms is your best option to first be able to attract them. So that could just be something simple like, hey, weekly we're going to post something on LinkedIn about what we're doing, some great project that we're launching. Even maybe you guys go out for dinner. take some pictures, post on that. It takes 5 minutes. So maybe even just add 10 minutes each week into your calendar to show people what the culture is actually like. If it's a remote environment, then it's really important for you to still be able to maximize those options with slightly different strategies. So on Glassdoor, for instance, set up that Glassdoor and have your current employees leave reviews, ask them to. And so that way people can actually see and get an idea about the company. So I think that's super important early on. I think when it comes down to it and you have those limited budgets, then you have to be a little bit more creative in the type of benefits that you may offer. So for instance, you may end up wanting to implement an unlimited vacation policy and see how that works. There's pros and cons to it, and we can dive into those pros and cons at this time or at a later date. But being able to figure out maybe it is even offering a remote work environment. So you want to make sure that you're finding people who can do that job, but also are going to need to be passionate about that project. And that can be in how you communicate that during the hiring process. People want to, and I always say people don't necessarily quit jobs, they quit managers, but if they're in a really good place and have all this money, they may not quit unless they really want to work for you. So I think that having it almost goes back to the hiring process even. If you have a lot of hiccups on that hiring process and hey, I've got to cancel this meeting because something came up, or we just added another interview because we need something else. We need to find out some more information. That can really have a huge impression on what the company culture may be like, and if somebody's willing to take a chance like that.
No, that makes sense. So now you're kind of along that, or switching gears just to touch on another one that we talked about. I mean, one of the other ones that is, it goes along with startups, but I always love to, sometimes there's, I'll say challenges, also flags, whatever you want to call them, of hurdles that you're going to do just generally with talent acquisition. If you're on the business side of doing the hiring, taking that position for a minute, what are some of those challenges or flags, things that you may want to avoid or be mindful of or consider as you're looking to make those talent acquisitions?
Um, so, so that is definitely an interesting question. So I think when you are some of the flags may just even be from the candidate's own mouth, right? Sometimes some of the things that the candidate may be talking about are could
And
be.
and just to rephrase, so I was taking more the opposite side of as you're putting out, give you an example just to kind of set the context. If I'm a owner of a business looking to attract or talent, sometimes it is, and I'm not saying one's right or wrong, super long, very in-depth job post. One example. Super short, not very descriptive job post. Another example. One
Yeah.
job post has hey, here's your exact salary that we're going to offer. One doesn't have any mention of what they're going to pay and says to be determined based on your skill set. Those are something, and I don't know that they're always right or wrong. And yet I think that you're trying to balance, right? And do I do it as a lighthearted, hey, we're cool and hip? Do I do it more formal? And so kind of any considerations as to how you balance, and it doesn't have to be a job post. I just giving that example of
Yeah.
things that as you're going out trying to attract that talent that you should or shouldn't consider.
Yeah, well, you did mention though about job posting. I think that is actually pretty important. So earlier stage companies, you're not going to have a lot of people coming to necessarily if you post something on LinkedIn, and you may not have as many candidates looking at. So I think it's important to not just communicate the job major functions, but also write a bit about the company in the beginning. You've got to tell that story. And that's what people are going to end up being attracted to. Tell your company's story. Speak about your passion. Founders are always very passionate about their company and the product that they have created. So they can usually speak on that, but you may need to end up parsing that down. just a little bit. So capture them quickly, capture their attention for why they may want to work, and then put a little bit about what the job is. I do think that having a range of a salary is important, and I think that people understand it's most of the jobs are going to be based on your experience when coming to a startup. There's no set level. Um, but communicating that early on because you don't want to get further down into the interview process, wasting your time with the candidate that did not have any sort of understanding about what the potential salary may be. So I think that is actually a great example that you brought up with a red flag.
No, and I'll caveat it. So I periodically I run my own firm, have my own businesses. So I don't really until something or changes or hits the fan or that I don't or actively go out and look at job postings. Other than I'm on LinkedIn and sometimes I have a reason so I'll see someone else posting it, and that's usually in the legal field. And the thing that drives me nuts is I've seen on a number of postings it will be, hey, you can make anywhere from 50,000 to 1 million, and it's all based on compensation of how much book of business you can bring in. It seems like that is I agree that there's a range, and people as long as it's a reasonable range and it gives people a realistic expectation. It seems like you're doing yourself almost more of a disservice if you're giving such a wide range that becomes meaningless and almost is worrisome from the candidate's perspective.
That is definitely very worrisome, and I think I agree with that 100%. You are hiring, and you know your budget already. You should be fully transparent with that, and be transparent with that through the interview process as well. The you may have draw a lot of unwanted attention, which is going to end up creating more chaos and headache for you at the end if you're doing something like that because you're going to have a whole lot of resumes to go through, and that can be hard to discern the right people who are there. So I think transparency from the get-go is also what candidates are looking for, right? That is attractive in a company. That's attractive in a manager. So that is also an added benefit in the end.
So now I want to get your thoughts or advice, and not necessarily directly one that we talked about before, but I think relevant to a lot of the conversation, which is, I know good, bad, or indifferent, not taking yes or no sides, the way that a lot of times they will startup or small business will try and attract talent will be on the promise of equity. So in other words, hey, we can't pay a lot now, but we'll give you ownership in the company. When we're the next unicorn that's, $1 billion in the next 3 years, you're going to be so rich, you're going to be thanking us for not paying you a lot, but for giving you a lot of equity or, a reasonable amount of equity. Now, does that resonate? So in other words, can you attract good talent by that offer of equity? Yeah, if no, then ends the questions. Second part of that question is if yes, or if that's reasonable to put in there, is there a way to couch that or to set the stage so that they can understand it's still risky business or this may or may not pay off? Kind of any thoughts generally on offering equity in lieu of I can't pay as much?
Absolutely. So one, I think that people need to be realistic about what the market is, and offering them a huge amount of equity, unless they are probably a friend of yours and are more than likely would potentially be willing to even invest in it. That is not going to attract talent. That does not, especially if they are already at another company. You're not going to pull somebody away from that. So that's why I think being realistic about and transparent from the get-go about what your actual cash budget is super important to not waste your time with candidates. So I don't think that equity, a huge amount of equity, and I see it all the time. So sometimes when I'm meeting with a client and I've brought them on, they have that idea. But once w you start to reach out to candidates, you have to listen to what they're saying, right? And actually understand what the market is. So you're able to bring that back and say, you know what, this is not realistic in this budget with all this equity. So if you created a job that is an engineer with product management experience and all these different things, you have to understand that is a super high paying job. And if you're not willing to pay for that, then you may need to figure out what part of that job and could potentially just be a project, hire a contractor, and then find somebody who can do the rest of the job as a full time, right? So it's about being creative with your budget and figuring out the best possibility to get that project done.
No, that makes sense. Now, maybe one or quick follow-up to that. So, would you say across, and I guess it's hard to say in every circumstance, but predominance or most circumstances, is it better to just simply not mention that you're going to provide equity, as you're going out looking for candidates, or is there a way that if that is part of what you are offering or want to offer, transparency on, hey, this is what we can pay you
Mhm.
realistically, here's an
Yes.
added benefit if you're interested. Should you just, not in or raise that or bring that up in the initial process? Or is there a way that you should or couch that so that it is realistic, setting realistic expectations and also trying to highlight that as a benefit? It's just kind
I,
of a follow-up to that.
Yeah, absolutely. So I do think that you need to mention that from the get-go and understanding because if you are keeping that close to you, that it does go back to transparency. But the people who are either moving from these companies or looking to join, that is part of the reason why they are doing it. One, they probably want to have a much larger impact and want to create things more. But two, they want the potential. They're willing to take that risk, but they're looking to get a piece of that at the end. So I think it is part of the benefits, but it should not be the main highlight in what you're pitching to the candidate. So if your budget is really small, then the you're going to have to really go outside of your network a bit, and you may need to be a little bit more flexible with potentially like location for certain jobs. A lot of companies currently, there's a big push for back to office just about everywhere. And so that is an added benefit, and then it can open up to talent that may not be as pricey.
Got it. Makes sense. So kind of with that, and we're starting to, it feels like our time is flying by, but we're starting to, not quite there, but starting to reach towards the end of the episode. But one of the other, before we get to the questions, I always like to wrap up with, we've touched on a number of things, but one that we haven't touched on quite as much is there's typically a few ways that you can go about doing recruiting. One is you mentioned, hey, internal memo, especially if you only have a few people on the team, it could just be a quick meeting. Who do you have in your personal network that we can reach out to or you can reach out to and engage interest? You can do job posting boards. You can go, whether it's LinkedIn or ZipRecruiter or whichever, platform you want, or you can start to engage in people that actually do the recruiting, right? In other words, this is their full-time job, or this is what they do and can add a lot of value. And different budgets, sometimes you don't have any budget and you go with the cheapest or the least expensive option, which sometimes you get, it works out well, and other times you get what you pay for. But how do you balance between the different options, everything from I have $0 to go out and do recruiting to I'm going to go do the platforms and do my own posting to go to a recruitment firm. Thoughts on the kind of how you go about figuring out what's best for your or for different situations.
Yeah, and then all, every single company is going to be completely different. So it really all depends on the company's immediate need, their long-term strategy, and their bandwidth, right? So if you have zero budget for that, then you need to start being more social and using other free networks as well. There's a ton of them to be able to find the right talent. So finding the right partnerships in different organizations, maybe nonprofits that specialize in helping to connect. But those can be tricky because you're going to end up getting it's not going to be targeted. right? So you may not find the right person, or it may take a while, or so it all depends on that. But if you have a bottleneck in your hiring process, I think that that's the best time that you need to try to find professional organizations that can help you find the right talent. So you can definitely be flexible. There's lots of recruiting agencies all across the country. A lot of them are specialized in very specific sectors or industries. And so finding the right agency also can be a little bit tricky. So referrals for agencies, you'd be surprised. So many people have had really great experiences. And so look for referrals, just like you're hiring talent. A quick Google search, you could definitely find plenty of recruiting agencies, but make sure that you interview them as just like you would be interviewing a candidate, because what you're going to end up paying them for is their network to find the right talent. And most agencies have specialists and either the industry and or specific types of jobs. So maybe there are specific recruiters for software engineers, product management, C-level. So that is important to find the right agency.
Oh, perfect. Makes perfect sense, and I think some great direction on that. So now with that, I'm sure plenty of other topics, things that we could hit on, and so we'll have to maybe have you back onto one of our sister podcasts in the future and continue the conversation.
Yeah.
But for today, I do always love to wrap up each episode with the same question, so we're going to jump to that now. So that question is within your industry, what is the biggest myth and why is it wrong?
So there's actually two things that I thought. First one is I get this question all the time. Recruiting agencies charge candidates. No, we do not. We do work on a two-sided customer service. So our candidates, we want to give them the best experience, but also the businesses who are actually paying us. But one of the biggest misconceptions and myths are that all we're doing is pulling resumes from a database and sending them over. So part of the reason why you're paying for those direct talent is one, we're either going out directly to meet and gather those very specific targets. But generally, recruiters and recruiting agencies, they have candidates that they've had ongoing, very long-term relationships. And that's how you can actually get candidates to start to be swayed to take the opportunity, because the agencies are intimate with these candidates. They know what they're attracted to, what type of projects they want to work on, and can also verify usually their technical experience to make sure that they are already qualified for the job. So definitely not just pulling resumes out of a database.
No, that I think that and that one's, it's an easy one to I'll give people the benefit of the doubt in the sense that the myth probably is reasonable to think that, in the sense that there probably are bad recruiters that are just getting started, that all they do is go do the job posting and send you a whole bunch of things. But I think, to that point, is there's a good recruiter is going to have a lot more connections, background, people that they are representing on the other side that are looking maybe for a change, or looking, are burned out, or wanting to do something different, that are looking for different structures. And the recruiter's oftentimes going to know that individual, know what they're looking for, and be able to make a much better match than just scattershotting it across, or what would be just some of the platforms. So I think it's definitely a great myth to dispel, and a great one to learn from.
Awesome.
Well, now as we do wrap up towards the end of the episode, if people want to reach out to you, they want to be a customer, they want to be a client, they want to be an employee, they want to be an investor, they want to be your next best friend, any or all of the above, what's the best way to reach out to you, contact you, find out more?
Uh, Feel free to reach out on LinkedIn. My name is Nicholas Sharp. I've got the rainbow after the first name, only one for that. You can email me at nicholas.sharp@intelliprogroup.com. It's Nicholas. Or feel free to reach out and text me at 202-999-2906.
Awesome. Well, I definitely encourage people to reach out, expand their network, support a great business. If nothing else, make a new best friend. So With that, thank you again for coming on the podcast. It's been fun. It's been a pleasure. Now, for all of you the listeners who are out there, if you have your own journey to share and you'd like to be a guest on the podcast, we'd love to have you. So just go to inventiveunicorn.com, apply to be on the show. A couple more things as listeners. Make sure to click share, subscribe, leave us a review. Helps us to reach even more startups and small businesses to help them along their journey to success. And along that note, along your journey, you ever need help with patents or trademarks or anything else with your startup or your small business, just go to strategymeeting.com. Grab some time with us to chat, and we're always here to help. Well, thank you again, Nichloas, for coming on the podcast, and wish the next leg of your journey even better than the last.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me. Have a great rest of your day.
Absolutely.